The whole point in this video is to share my experience with you. If you're thinking about maybe doing a dry pour concrete project at your house or your homestead and you've never worked with concrete before, I'll show you some of the mistakes, especially one big mistake that I made, and it could jeopardize the overall outcome of this project. I'm going to have to wait and time will tell if it's going to be usable or if it's going to be a complete failure. But this is our experience on our first dry pour concrete slab project. So I've been doing some research browsing YouTube for ideas of how to put an entryway or either pour a slab or build a deck out in the front of the entrance to this off-grid workshop that I built in my backyard. And I ran across a video by Cajun Country Living. They had several videos on dry pour concrete slabs. And this is something I've never seen before. So I watched a few of those videos and I thought, well, that might be a pretty good option for an entryway or a slab in front of this 12 by 16 shed that we're turning into an off-grid workshop. Anyhow, I was inspired by those videos and I thought maybe I'll give that a shot. So this video is going to be showing you our experience doing this dry pour concrete slab for the first time, and neither one of us have really any experience working with concrete. So first of all, you have to do whatever you have to do to prep the area. Our particular setup here is we're going to pour it 10 feet long and 5 feet wide right across centered on the front entrance of this off-grid workshop. 3 edges will be with a 2x4, and then up against the shed will be the second lengthwise edge of the concrete slab. And we've decided that we're going to pour this slab 1.5 inches thick, which is not a conventional way to pour a concrete slab. But this is only going to have foot traffic. So I'm hoping that 1.5 inches thick is going to be sufficient for what we're trying to use this slab for. But either way, whether you're doing a traditional wet pour standard concrete slab, or if you're trying to do this dry pour concrete slab, the prep time is basically identical. You're not really saving anything with one process or one technique or the other over the preparation time, whether it be a dry pour or a traditional wet pour. I just went online and found a free concrete calculator, typed in my numbers, 1.5 inches thick, 5 by 10 feet, and it determined that I needed just under 11 bags in order to dry pour this concrete slab. So I bought 11 bags. This is one of the first mistakes that I made, is I probably should have bought 1 extra bag. And you'll see a little bit later when I get to my big mistake portion of the video how most people will probably buy an extra bag or two and then have to take it back if you don't need it. But I was hoping, since it was just under 11 bags on the calculator, 11 bags would do it. And that also really highly depends on your accuracy of how level the floor is. I'm pretty sure that right up against the edge of the shed is a little bit thicker than 1.5 inches. The rest of it's pretty close. So this turned out to be an awful lot of work. I hauled these 11 bags of concrete 4 separate times. From the shelf to the cart at the store, from the cart to the truck, from the truck to the backyard, and then finally from where I stored them on the back deck there to where they're going to end up was the 4th time. So I've moved over 3,500 pounds of concrete bags around by myself before I even poured anything into this form. It wasn't much fun. But anyway, again, that's going to be something that will be the same whether you're going to do a wet pour or a dry pour concrete slab. And once I got all the, at least the front row of concrete dumped out into the form, and I got my screed. Now, this is probably my second mistake, as I used a 2x4 that was 8 foot, and then I added a 3-foot section to it to make it 11 feet. Because of the way the orientation of the slab up against the off-grid workshop, I decided the best way to screed this would be lengthwise. And it wasn't the most ideal, and this actually kind of created some problems for me later on in this project. And I decided, just because I had some laying around, I used 2 9.5-foot lengths of 3/8 inch rebar. And I figured I'd put 3/8 inch rebar in here. Whether that's enough or not, I have no idea, but I had it laying around and it was just starting to rust away, so I figured I'd throw it in here just as additional support, because this is only 1.5 inches thick dry pour slab. Maybe it will help prevent it from cracking later down the line. But I won't know that until we have it in place for a while, and we'll see what happens. Now I'm getting down to the last bag, and I had my wife help me screed this because that was a 10-foot span across there, and it was pretty hard to do that by yourself. And they show you on the Cajun Country Living videos, who obviously have a lot more experience at this than I do. We had a hard time getting a smooth finish on the top. We had a lot of rocks showing, and as we would screed and back up and dump more concrete mix on top and try to come across that again to work those pebbles down into the concrete mix so that you have a nice powdery surface to give you a nice smooth finish, that was becoming more of a challenge than we had anticipated. And we either ran out of skill or patience, and we just were never able to get a powdery smooth finish like they show you on a lot of those other videos of people doing these dry concrete slab pours. Now the surface was nice and level and flat, but we still had a lot of those pebbles. And the more times we'd go over that, throw more concrete mix on top of it and come over it again, it was just dragging those little pebbles in this concrete mix. Now it could be the concrete mix brand. I honestly don't know. And if you look at this section here, as I go across that front edge of the form board, you can see we're about a ½ inch short of being up level with the top. So we needed at least one more bag of concrete mix in order to fill this up completely. So the 11 bags in my case wasn't quite enough to do it. I needed one more bag. So here's where the big mistake began. I'm thinking to myself, if I just use a bag of Portland cement, which is an ingredient in the concrete mix bags, that's the powder, I could just come across over the top of this whole thing with a thin layer of powder. It'll fill all those little holes, cover up those rocks, and I'll use the rest of it to just fill up the form so it brings it all up to a level surface all the way to the edge. That was the thought process and the idea that I believe was a big mistake. Let's go into that and I'll show you what problems that created. And then finally, we'll look at the end result and we'll see if it's actually going to be a complete failure or if it's actually going to work. So I bought one 47-pound bag of Portland cement mix, and this is just like talcum powder. There's no aggregate in here, no sand and no rocks, no gravel. You're not supposed to just use cement by itself. It's got to have something to bond together like the sand and the gravel. Anyway, so I spread this out, just try to do a layer over the top of this, and then we're going to take that screed board and run it across there and go through the whole process of leveling this out again. And it was a little bit better, but it still was far from perfect, at least a lot less perfect than I was hoping for. And you can see we have our screed board in this portion of the screeding process laying flat. And that was because of another problem. Our 2x4 had a warp in it, was kind of bowed, and it was leaving a bow on the top surface. So it's really important that you use a nice straight board, as straight a board as you can possibly find. And I think it would have worked better had we used the edge of the 2x4 instead of the flat side. But anyway, this is what we ended up doing because it's what we had to work with. So we worked that all across there, and then the last foot or so from the edge of the slab has about a ½ inch thick pure Portland cement instead of like a mix where it has at least sand, so it'd be like mortar or sand and gravel for the aggregate to make it into a concrete mix. One of the problems with using concrete powder only is the shrinkage is going to be ridiculous, the way it absorbs the water, and it's just not designed to be used all by itself. Portland cement is meant to be used as an ingredient within your concrete mix. I'll tell you at the end of the video, I'll run through my thoughts and tell you what I would have done differently having made this mistake now, looked at the result, and then how I would go about it on the next pour if I were to do this all over again. The next part of this process, as recommended by other videos I've seen, is to go over the surface with a paint roller. So that's what I decided I would do. And using that Portland cement created more problems here. As I was going over it with the roller, it was such a fine powder that the roller was picking up a lot of powder off of the surface. And you'll see at the end of this rolling job, when I bang the roller on the ground, you'll see how much cement dust comes out of the roller. But what it was doing was picking up a bunch of the dust and then making a rough surface and depositing little pockets of dust across the surface. It looks kind of smooth on the video, but when you get up close, it really wasn't very smooth. It was almost better if I'd have just left it alone. And then since I bought the little edger tool, I decided to go around and again, being just a ½ inch thick Portland cement It was just like trying to put an edge on a pile of flour. I was able to get it done, but I wasn't really pleased with the result. This may have a lot to do with skill and experience, which I have zero. But as I worked it, I finally got it to where I thought it would be acceptable. And then the edger left a rim there, or a little pile of dust. So I took the roller, went over that again, kind of smooth it out and clear it up. And this was the end result. Then on to the watering process. I just used the recommended watering. I did 2 mistings with just a fine mist until the surface turns a little bit dark. 1 every hour for the first 2 hours. That puts a crust on there so that when you hit it with the shower, it won't leave a bunch of water droplets in the surface. And then since this is 1.5 inches thick, I did 2 showerings per inch once every hour. This is the last showering before I let it sit for the night. Then the next morning, my 15-year-old buddy said he would test it out for me and make sure it was okay. Then it was time to pull the boards and have a look at the edges and see what I ended up with. You can see where that 1/2 inch thick Portland powder, it's pretty crumbly. There was no strength in that. It didn't adhere together very well. And it just didn't come out nearly as well as I had hoped. Here's some of the powder that was on the outside of the forms, just to show you how crumbly, and there's no strength in this at all. So ultimately, I just took my little garden shovel and scraped off all the loose edges and the crumbly edges. I was able to get it to this stage, and this is what the edges looked like when I was finished with that. Some of those thicker portions of the Portland concrete actually ended up with several hairline cracks, and they didn't go all the way through the slab as far as I could tell, but it was definitely not a good sign. And here's a couple of spots showing where that paint roller picked up the powder and moved it around and pulled it away from some of the rocks, leaving a pretty rough surface. So if I were to do this again, I would definitely not use the Portland cement to fill in the divots, and definitely not using it a 1/2 inch thick to fill up where I needed more concrete mix. I would use a mortar mix, and there's a guy that's done some videos doing that, and he's actually shown some pretty good results. So I would just use a mortar mix for the top maybe 1/2 inch of your form if you want a real smooth finish, and that'll screed a lot better than the concrete with the aggregate in it. Definitely make sure you have a nice straight board for your screed board so you don't build a bow or a warp or a sag into the top surface of your concrete slab. I don't have a lot of confidence in the 1.5 inch thick slab, so next time I would do a 4 inch thick slab of this size. 1.5 inches might be sufficient, but personally I'd use 3.5 to 4 inches thick for a larger slab. I'll do a follow-up video on this slab project at some point in the future, so make sure you subscribe and click the bell so you'll be notified if you're interested in following up on that. And I'll just let you know how it does. I'm going to leave it down and we'll go with it, see how it lasts, see if it continues to crack and fall apart, and just see what the overall durability is of it. If you enjoyed this video, or if it helped you out in some way with your own dry pour concrete slab project, I'd appreciate it if you give me a thumbs up. That'll help me out with the YouTube algorithm and let more people be able to see this video so they don't make the same mistakes that I did on my first dry pour concrete slab project. Click the video on the screen now for another DIY homestead project, and we'll see you over there.